Hey y'all, it's me, Lisa, your eccentric Texas friend. Welcome to my channel, She Raven. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to do a small podcast today. I've got on my awesome sweater. I love anything eccentric. I think I've said that many, many times. You know, you're eccentric Texas girl. I love that. I found this sweater and I was like, oh yeah, gotta have it. And luckily it was in my size. We're not gonna say what size, but luckily it was in my size. And it has kind of like a dog bone. Only me. But it has a dog bone on the zipper. So I absolutely love it. I've got my fun sweater on today. I've got my normal bracelets, but I've got this fun like charm bracelet. And then this one I just kind of stole from my daughter. It fell off her, I guess, and I put it on. It's not even really hot, to be quite honest with you. It's not hot. It's not even cold. It's not cold enough for me to be wearing a sweater, but I want it to be extra. And it is a little bit chilly because when I woke up this morning, I dressed my son in shorts, but I realized it was like in the 50s. You know, the Mother Nature can't make up her mind. One minute it's super hot, the next minute it's super cold, and I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. So I had to quickly iron some pants for him. If you're a parent, whether you're a mom or a dad or whatever, grandparent, whatever, you know how that morning before school rush is, where you're running around and you're trying to get clothes ready, you're trying to get lunch ready, you're just trying to get, life moving, the kids going. So yeah, got him nice and dressed, had enough time, and then I realized I'm gonna have to iron a pair of pants for him, so I had to do that. So I guess I can wear my super cool sweater, but it's not necessarily warranted, especially not in my room, because it's nice and warm in here. It's nice and toasty. But yeah, anyways, so this is my channel, She Raven, where I talk about true crime, 100% true crime junkie. I love it. Love everything spooky, all of that. And I just kind of talk about whatever comes to my mind. Whenever it comes to my mind, I'll just blah, 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 blah. And if you'd like to sometimes join me whenever I upload a video, please hit the like and subscribe button. And today I'm going to do a child abuse. Yeah, a child abuse podcast. This one is an oldie, but every now and again, I love just not necessarily rehashing, but remembering those that are no longer with us and the tragedy that they had to endure for the time that they were here on this earth. And this case right here is definitely one of those tragic cases, and good came from it. So you'll see in the end, good actually came from it. So if you want to, grab yourself a drink, get comfortable. This one shouldn't be too long. Yeah, it's just a tragedy. And this one is the tragic tale of Terrell Peterson. Yeah. So let's go ahead and let's just kind of jump right into it. I mean, there's no other way of doing that, especially with these kind of cases when it's children or when it's anybody, when it's anyone. But like I said, this one is much older, but I just wanted to talk about it. It's one of those ones that pulls at my heartstrings still. I know, like, one of my very first podcast, two of the cases that I really was like, oh my gosh, I did a podcast on those two. But let's go ahead and let's, get into this one. Like I said, I can go on, and I jump all over the place with different topics. The tragic tale of Terrell Peterson. Terrell Peterson was a 5-year-old boy from Atlanta, Georgia, who was tortured and beaten to death. So this actually happened while he was actively a part of state supervision, and that happens a lot. We know that happens a lot, and there's no excuse for that. I mean, there's absolutely like zero excuse. But as someone who has encountered some CPS workers, and again, there's no excuse for this, but they sometimes put a lot on one worker. A lot. And I don't know. They put too much on them. They really do. And a lot of those workers, sometimes they have their master's degree and they have, higher education. And I remember one young lady one time telling me, because she worked for the state, CPS, and, she went in all gung-ho. This is before she had even finished with her master's. I'm going to go for social working. I love helping people. I want to make a difference. And that's where it kind of gets you, because they do want to make a difference and they do want to help people. Every social worker I've ever met, that is how they are and how they want to be. Sorry about that. That's my other computer. They want to be helpful and they want to really just help, whether it's adults, whether it's children. And I remember this particular person telling me once, this is nothing like they teach you in college. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, in college, you're taught by a book. And she said, that book, there are steps that have to take place. And she said, it's a series of things you have to do. And she said, but once you get into the field, all of a sudden, all those books, all those classes, all that teaching, it's just tossed out the window. And it's like, do it this way, quick, 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 quick. And she said, your desk can be piled high with cases. And she said, it's almost like nobody cares, but it's not necessarily like nobody cares on your level. But she said, just as you continuously go up, because she's like, how many cases can you honestly, legitimately work on and honestly sit down and do the steps? So, that's really, that's where I am with that. I don't know whether it would be hire more workers. I don't know if maybe hire more workers at more pay, or hire more workers at a lower pay, or lower the standards of what they're asking for. I don't know what the correct answer would be for that, because you do need higher education to get into this field, unless you've been in the field before those requirements were created, which would mean, I don't know, usually about 15, 20 years ago. And, not everyone is like that, but it's hard. It's hard on them. And she ended up leaving, and that's the right thing to do. When you see you're being put in a situation where you can't do what you need to do to properly do your job to the best of your ability, then you do need to leave. At that point, you do need to say, you know what, this is not working out for me, or you know what, I'm not even going there. And my career, for example, I've worked in the early childhood education field, and that's basically just daycare, pre-K, that kind of thing. Little private pre-Ks, and we do fall under state guidelines. That's how I know so many social workers, or I've met them throughout the years. And even in that sense, they overwork them sometimes. A lot of times, they have these investigations, situations, just you name it, and it comes into play. And it comes into play even as far as the child care providers or the centers, because when you're really investigating something, and that's where this particular person was telling me, like, there's no time for what you're supposed to really do. You got to get in there and you got to talk to whomever has a point of contact in that child's life. So whether it's the the pre-K teacher, or, in this case, the director, me, that kind of thing. And it's hard, and like I said, she got out of that business, and good for her, because you never know what's going to happen. And she got out proactively before anything crazy happened. She immediately felt unsatisfied with the work that she was doing, because the children, she loved them. She told me that. She said, I love them. I love working with them. I love working for them, because, you work for these children when you're in this industry. And she said, but it's too much. The higher ups do not give you the tools that you need to properly do your work. And I know, just even coming from, early childhood education, I myself, when I would hire my girls, I would always tell them, because, their abuse can be anywhere, that's just the way it is. There have been many childcare providers that, have gone to jail and things like that for abusive behavior also. It's not just parents or foster parents or, caregivers in the sense of family. It can be caregivers in the sense of non-family too. But, one of the things I would always tell them, besides this is your job, this is how you do it, that kind of thing, is tread lightly. I would always tell them, this is the one, and actually, now that I'm saying it, it's probably not the one industry, but this is one of the few industries that can cause you to go to jail if you mess up. And, sometimes, they'd say to me, because a lot of times, it might be younger girls, and a lot of people in the childcare industry don't even have kids yet. And they'd say to me, well, what do you mean? And I would say, I would much rather you tell me I can't handle this, or you know what, I'm having a moment, and walk out the front door, than to take out aggression on a child. You screw up in this industry, and it can just take one time, one simple thing that you don't realize, and you will be in jail. And I tell them that. You will be in jail. They'll come in here, they'll pull recordings, everything. So if for some reason there's a kid that can't stop crying, or you just had a problem with your boyfriend and you can't handle it, leave. Literally, leave. Cross all your T's and dot all your I's in this industry. And CPS is a lot, like that. Like I said, all childcare is proctored through CPS, but it's one of those industries. You mess up, and not only could a child be seriously injured, but a child can lose their life, and that's what happened in this particular situation. Like I said, Terrell Peterson was he was actively part of state supervision. And because of the industry I come from, I know that means, they're supposed to actively supervise him, at least, every now and again. And I've seen situations where, sometimes, unfortunately, because CPS is bogged down with work, where children that I know, I'm trying to think how I'm going to say this, children that I know that I should be making contact with, or CPS should be making contact with me, because I don't know the schedule. It isn't really happening on a consistent basis. Luckily for the situations in which I've been a part of, those children have all been in really great homes, in loving situations, and nothing negative has ever happened. And maybe that's why they didn't come. I don't know, because when it really gets down to the nitty gritty, I have no idea how they work it. So, anyways, Terrell Peterson was a 5-year-old boy from Atlanta, Georgia, who was tortured and beaten to death. This happened while he was actively a part of state supervision. So this case showcases the gross misconduct of the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services. So this is old. So I'm assuming they have maybe updated some of their processes. And I'm going to cross my fingers, and I believe in the system, and I'm going to cross my fingers and probably say they probably have, but I don't know that for a fact. So from 1995 to 1998, over 800 children died while they were a part of the Department of Family and Children's Services in Georgia. That's a lot. 800. Yeah. So going back to Terrell, January 1998, he was beaten to death. He was rushed to an Atlanta emergency room where doctors noticed signs of serious trauma. And it was basically just signs of torture all over his tiny body. You know, he was brought to the emergency room unconscious, and they just noticed, you know, like, wow, what happened to this kid? And that's usually what happens in these particular situations, is they're brought into the emergency room for, by that time, usually some sort of extreme trauma, and the nurses and the doctors are noticing other things all around, you know, their little body, because, you know, they take the clothes off and everything like that. He only weighed 29 pounds. So think about that for a second alone. 29 pounds. And when you think about kids, you know, I'm not sure how familiar you are with kids, but when I think, and I've been in the industry or the childcare industry, but when I think of kids, I think, okay, 29 pounds, especially today with all the processed goodies we eat. I would say that could be anywhere between a 12-month to maybe even an 18-month-old. So that's little tiny babies, you know, babies that have a vocabulary of maybe like, I don't know, 20 to 50 words, depending on how socialized they are. And this is a 5-year-old coming in weighing 29 pounds. And if you really think about it, even the smaller babies, when you put them in a car seat and you lift up that car seat is almost 29 pounds, you know, with the baby in the car seat. So he was really, really, he had no nutrition in his body. So yeah, that's sad. So Terrell was rushed to the emergency room. He weighed 29 pounds and he was covered in cuts, bruises, and cigarette burns. Like, I can't even. I cringe if I accidentally. I'll cringe if I accidentally step on the dog, you know, step on the dog's tail or step on the dog's foot, because, you know, I've got this one little Chihuahua and she follows every single place. You can't even turn around and boom, she's right there. And sometimes you end up nipping her and she lets out a little yip and you're just like, poor thing, I'm so sorry. And to actually burn a child on purpose, you know, I can't. And then having a body that is covered in cigarette burns, I can't even think of that. So let's talk a little bit about his background. Terrell's biological mother, she did drugs while she was pregnant with him. Terrell was taken from his biological mother, and there were complaints that the kids were being abused, that they were locked in bedrooms all weekend, denied food and water. The kids were begging the neighbors for food. You know, the mom was on drugs, like I said. So in June of 1996, Terrell and his siblings were removed from their parents' care, and they were placed with Fran Peterson, who is a non-blood relative of Terrell's. Mrs. Peterson was the grandmother of his half-brother and sister. And the reason I say a non-blood relative is, according to the protocols at that time, you have to try to find a blood relative of the child's. That's the first thing you try to do, is find a blood relative. And I think that would be possibly put in place because they feel like if a child goes to a blood relative, that blood relative is a little bit more apt on wanting to take care of them more. So that's where I'm assuming that protocol, you know, went into. But, you know, not always is a blood relative even willing to take you. But in this case, I guess where the problem was that they didn't even try to find a blood relative. It was just, you know, hey, let's take him over here to the grandmother or the others. And, you know, that part right there about, you know, the kids and the mom being on drugs, those kind of things always really bother me. Because when I was younger, I grew up a little bit on South Beach, Miami Beach. And I tell people I was there during the transition phase. So when you think of South Beach right now, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, actually. It consistently tops within that top like 10, maybe even top 20 of the most beautiful beaches. It's just so amazing. Beautiful Art Deco styles. And when I was there, all the hotels right along that main strip, 85 to 90% were closed down. And when I was there, they were going through a process where people were buying them and actually creating them into what they are today. And now these are literal the hotels that are across the street from the ocean. And when I was there, it was mainly old people. It was like a retiree's paradise. Old people everywhere. All of those expensive clubs and stores and just fantastic places you see. Those used to be little bakeries and little grocery stores. So when I tell people, oh, I kind of grew up on South Beach, I grew up in the middle of that transition. So not the South Beach you see today, but as it was becoming that. And then also what would happen is the apartment buildings, because I lived with my mom and we lived in an apartment, the apartment buildings were being bought out by one particular company that I can think of. And the rent was being raised like 2-3 times, you know, higher, because they were in the process of creating just like a worldwide mecca. You know, they weren't gonna, you know, let that real estate stay for, you know, a retiree's paradise much longer. And I say that for a reason, because I remember, and I don't remember his name, but I remember one of my friends in the next apartment building over, he was taken away by CPS. And it was just like you see in the movies when they finally came. They had a little square suitcase that him and his sister had, and they were taken away. And I remember him, you know, I just happened to be outside, and I remember him telling me, "Bye, Lisa." And it's gonna make me cry. But I just remember that. And I remember saying bye and, you know, giving him a hug and really not even understanding what was happening. I don't even know if he understood that. He went into the worker's car, and I remember him looking out the back window and, you know, just kind of looking at me. And, you know, I'm just there waving to him. And as sad as it was, I did not realize, you know, he was being taken away at that time by CPS. I didn't realize I'd never see him again. I'm not sure if he realized that, but prior to that, for a couple of weeks, you know, he would go around and he would ask people for food. You know, he would ask, and it was always eggs. He always wanted eggs because I think he knew how to cook eggs. And we were in elementary school. So I wasn't even in 5th grade yet. So I'm not sure what grade he was in. I think he was younger than me, but his sister was younger. And he always wanted to know if he could have some eggs, because I think he could cook eggs. And even in my head as a child, I didn't really understand what he was going through, or I would have probably just given him food, because at that point, you know, all of us kids in the apartment, we all were we were latchlock key kids, which meant we came home from school and we stayed. We had nobody watching us until our parents came home. And that's actually how I learned how to cook, is just destroying everything in the house until I finally got it right, making different meals. And I would have given him food if I had really understood that he didn't need eggs, he needed food. They had nothing. He was hungry. And I just, as a kid, I didn't really understand that. And I remember, saying bye to him, and later on, hearing, the people saying, oh, his mom's on drugs. Well, they were saying that before. When he would go around always asking for food, they'd say his mom was on drugs. His mom was on drugs. And she was always gone. The kids were by themselves. And I remember just not really understanding it. Not even really understanding what's drugs. His mom's on drugs? What? I didn't get it. I don't know if he got it. I know he probably understood the fact that he was alone. And it was just really an impactful moment for me, saying goodbye to him and realizing later on, much, much later on, because there's so many things about, my childhood that I don't even remember. You don't remember things, but certain things are etched into your memory, and that is one of the things. The last face he saw from our area before his life was changed, and I don't even know if it was changed for the better or the worse, was me. At that time, I was the only kid that was there saying goodbye to him, and I didn't even know I was going to be saying goodbye to him. I didn't even understand who this, exactly who this was, or I think he did tell me that she was taking him, but I didn't get it. So, yeah, it's really hard when you have a parent on drugs, and that's from my perspective as a bystander who hasn't even seen the worst of it. Because his case, I'm sure, was not the worst. I don't know who in the apartment, if anyone, gave him food or eggs or things of that nature. But from the little bit I saw, it has really impacted me and really hurt me. I mean, even to this day, I think about him. And that's what I mean about, remembering things. I don't even remember his name. Even if I remembered his name, I wouldn't remember his last name. I mean, we were children. So yeah, just, when I was researching this story, just that part of the story just really, just hurt me. Yeah, I don't know. And I think it's because of the age. Because a lot of the stories that I research, the kids with child abuse like this, the kids are asking for food and stuff. But I think because of the age and because my friend was younger and more vulnerable, well, they're all vulnerable, but I think it's just something about the age. So, like I said, he was placed with a non-blood relative, and this is Mrs. Peterson. She was the grandmother of his half-brother and sister. Child Protective Services was supposed to check in with him once per month. And ideally, again, he was supposed to be placed with blood relatives if that can happen. I once had a daycare parent. She made a career out of being a foster parent. I don't think she was a mean person. I hope she wasn't mean to any of the kids. I was, but at that time she had grandchildren. But I know one time she made a comment to me, and I thought, like when someone makes one of those comments and you're just like, oh, whatever. But she told me about foster care and I don't think she meant it in a mean way. I live in Texas, so the things I hear sometimes because I live in Texas. I mean, you know what? I doubt she meant it in a mean way because I was taking care of her grandkid and she loved him to death. But she made this comment and she said, she had like a southern accent. And she was like, nobody ever wants the black babies. I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, the family never wants the black babies. That's why so many are in foster care. And it's just like kind of insert eye roll. But in her situation, she was saying that when a child comes from a really rough background, she has noticed that nobody wants the ethnic babies. Let me put it that way. So I don't know if it's just the blacks, but she's like, she's like, you can call every family member down down the list, but if everyone is living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, she's like, nobody ever wants to take them. And she's like, that's just what I've learned my career as being a foster mother. She did it literally as a job, her whole entire career. Her daughter was even adopted. She had adopted her daughter as one of the kids who came through. But she's like, they never take them. She's like, they will stay in foster care until they're 18. Now, how true that is, I don't know. That's just her from someone who did it for over 20 years. So I don't know in this particular situation if, well, I guess they didn't check in the first place. CPS didn't check to see if anyone would have taken him, but they might have had that notion in their head. I don't know. So they were supposed to check on him once a month, and like I said, ideally he should have been placed with a blood relative. During his time with Mrs. Peterson, Child Services had very little to no contact with Terrell and no monthly visits during his time. Also, they were supposed to explain as a foster child the rules on corporal punishment. There's no indication that they actually did that. I would like to think that people would know that you're not supposed to beat a kid silly, put cigarettes out on a kid. But, according to the research that I found, they just make a point of these kinds of little things. Like, there was no actual, communication on corporal punishment. But, his treatment went way, way above and beyond corporal punishment. So, yeah. After a while, signs of his abuse started to show. His Head Start teacher, so Head Start is usually like a pre-K program, at least from what I know. Head Start is usually like a pre-K program. His Head Start teacher, Joanne Bryant, found him searching the trash for food. In Thanksgiving 1996, Terrell was rushed to the emergency room. He was beaten up, and the doctor said he had battered child syndrome. So he was rushed to the emergency room right before Thanksgiving, and when he got there, the attending doctors looked at him. He's all beaten up and bruised, and the doctor obviously came to the conclusion that Terrell had battered child syndrome. So that means he would have had to been beaten up pretty badly, more than just the normal cuts and bruises. And I've seen some really rough kids, my time, where they're all battered up, but it's all not self-inflicted, but play-inflicted. And, doctors know. I mean, they really do know. One of my children, one day, he left on a weekend, and he came back, and all over here was black, jet black. And his grandmother just knew that it was her daughter's boyfriend. She just knew. She's telling me, I just know that he must have hit him. He must have done something. The emergency room said no. They could tell by the type of fracture it was, or, how it just, the x-rays and everything. And he had to go see a specialist, and the specialist said the same thing, that his bruises were consistent with a fall, and the way it was explained, he fell, and that they would know if someone had been hitting on him, or even if it had been a slap or a punch or an object that was slapped across him. So these doctors really, they're so good at what they do. They really know, and they really understand how to properly identify when someone is hurt, and it is a man-made bruise versus falling into something or falling onto something, or something like that. So I decided to kind of look up what battered child syndrome was, because I knew based on how they're using it, I knew what it meant, but I'd never really taken a look at the actual definition. So, battered child syndrome is defined as the collection of injuries sustained by a child as a result of repeated mistreatment or beatings. If a child's injuries indicate intentional trauma or appear to be more severe than could reasonably be expected to result from an accident, battered child syndrome should be suspected. So it's kind of basically what I was just saying. They kind of know, and it's, based on this definition, they also take into account the overall health of the child. So in the case of the little boy that I knew that had fallen and he literally had like a huge, massive black eye, they would take a look at him and see that the rest of his body was okay. Or, children who are very rough, with their play, and they're always getting all bruised up. They can take a look. They can take a look at the bruises. They can take a look at how many, how far apart they are, things of that nature, and kind of speculate, you know what, this does sound like a kid who's really into, his play and really active and just, normal wear and tear as some children do. So in this particular case, when he was rushed to the emergency room, they knew, he was too bruised up. So this is his first time at the emergency room. They knew he was too bruised up, and the doctor said, this child has been battered. This is battered child syndrome, meaning somebody has been beating up on him. So Terrell is diagnosed with battered child syndrome, and Mrs. Peterson is arrested. So, yeah. So get this part. This is where it's kind of like, wow, I don't even know if there's a proper excuse for this. So she goes to trial. So when she goes to trial, Terrell isn't there. He's not at the trial. And his caseworker was supposed to bring him. His caseworker, Cheryl Elmore, did not only not bring him to trial, but she didn't show up. So his caseworker is supposed to come, and she doesn't bring him, but then she doesn't show up herself. And with children that are in foster care, and I know this because I've been in the childcare industry, they have schedules where, they can jot in. They have like drivers. If a child's supposed to be here or there or here or there, and the person they're with, the foster mother or father can't take them, there's a driver that actually comes and picks them up. A worker. It's not a caseworker, but it's literally someone who is almost like an Uber, but it's not an Uber. This person works for the state, but that's their job, to take, different kids all over the place, wherever they're going. So it's like, it's like a taxi-in service. So Terrell does not show up, but then the caseworker doesn't show up. So this causes the judge to dismiss the case because there's no victim, there's no case. Terrell is the victim. He's not there, and his representation is the state, and they're not there. So there's no case. What are you going to do? So instead of rescheduling the case, this caseworker created a fraudulent memo saying that the judge determined there was no child abuse and dismissed the case. So she misses the case for whatever reason. Maybe she's overworked, she's tired. I don't know. Only she would know. But instead of saying, "Oh my God, I missed the case. Can I reschedule?" and getting whatever reprimand she has to get from her boss, she creates a memo, because she's obviously, she knows what she's doing, stating that the judge decided there was no child abuse in Terrell's case, and he dismissed the case. So yeah, so that had never happened. That was all fake. She lied on that because she hadn't shown up and Terrell had never shown up. The judge hadn't seen him. So that was basically what caused the nail in the coffin, because that meant that Terrell had to go back to Mrs. Peterson. He had to go back to the place that was harming him and hurting him, because she had basically signed, oh, there's no abuse. So all of the beatings and everything that he had on him, none of that ever was brought into to anyone's attention other than hers. So yeah. So he went back to Mrs. Peterson. So now we're going to go fast forward a little while. Back in his Head Start class, the teacher realized something was off. She realized something was wrong with him. He was acting kind of strange. He was walking kind of strange. And she's like, something is wrong with him. Because now at this point, it would have been, hey, there's nothing wrong with him. They said I'm clear. He just hurt himself. So at that point, as a Head Start teacher, you're just like, oh, okay. Because obviously you think everybody's doing their job. So if someone comes up to you and they say, oh yeah, you know what, that was fine. This was an accident. This happened, but everything's fine. You just say, okay. So she realizes after a while that he's acting strange and he's walking strange and there's something wrong. And upon taking off Terrell's shoes, she sees both his feet are completely burnt. Mrs. Peterson was enraged over being arrested and having to go to jail. She burned the skin off the bottom of both his feet. Yeah, she burnt the skin off the bottom of both his feet. He had to have skin from his hip transplanted to the bottom of both his feet. So I don't even know at that time what her excuse was for that. But, again, she's got this proof that this judge dismissed the case. So, and that's what I never really understand about child abuse in general. You've battered this boy. The doctors know something has happened to him. They may not know who it was because they weren't there. And instead of saying at that point, you know what? I don't want to take Terrell back. Something about having to take someone who is not my grandchild or whatever the situation is. I don't want to take him back. Instead of saying, I can't handle this, or this is too much, or, you guys are asking for too much. I have my other 2 grandchildren, and now I have some other man's child. I don't want to do this. You take him back. That's what I don't understand. In a lot of the child abuse cases, I don't understand what makes a person keep going. Why do you keep at it and keep at it? There's so many other avenues where you can just say, you know what, I need a break. It's like I was saying with the women that I hire. I tell them this industry will send you to jail if you screw up. I'd rather you walk out the front door and say, I've had it up to here today. Whatever the problem is, I've had it up to here. Lisa, I can't deal with it right now. I'd rather you walk out of the front door and then me have to go into your classroom and cover for you and let you take a break than for you to hurt any child. And that's what I don't understand about most child abuse cases. I don't understand, why can't you know your limits and say, you know what, there's something wrong with me. Enough. So anyways, she burnt the skin off of both of his feet and put shoes on him and sent him to school. Like nobody was going to notice. This poor child can't even walk. Like nobody was going to notice. He's hobbling around. Or, I can only imagine he might have been trying to tippy-toe all day. Goodness. So for this accident, during the next 12 months, from when he had the skin burnt off his feet to him being killed, Child Protective Services didn't see him once. So he had the skin burnt off his feet. Obviously, he had to go to the hospital for that. He had to have skin grafts from his butt to the bottom of his feet. He would have had to stay in the hospital for that. And during this whole entire time, until he actually died, CPS did not lay eyes on him one time. I have a girlfriend who had a foster kid. Eventually, she ended up adopting this particular foster kid. But every single thing she did with that foster kid had to be pre-approved. Everything. She wanted to go out town a little bit, couple hours out to go visit her parents. That had to be pre-approved. One time he had something, I think his tonsils removed or something, I don't remember, but that had to be pre-approved. In the hospital, it's always like he's under supervision of Department of, Family Services. But yet Terrell was taken to the hospital for this major surgery. Both his feet burnt. How do you even explain that away? And what do you say? Like maybe I don't even know. Maybe a person can accidentally burn one foot, but both? And then it would have had to been burnt in a way that the doctors would know that this, again, wasn't an accident. We already read about the definition of battered child syndrome, so that means you probably were beaten up all over him. His body probably had all those bruises still, all these cigarette burns, everything else, and now both his feet are all burnt up. So badly that you had to do skin grafts. And Child Protective Services, they didn't see him one time. Not one time. So let's go back to the beginning of the story for a quick second here. So January 1998, he's rushed to the ER and he dies from his injuries, okay? So he was so horrifically abused that the coroner couldn't decide on the exact cause of death. So this is not the burns on the foot anymore. This is when he finally actually passes away. So he goes and he has the skin grafts, and that part is taken care of. He goes to the hospital and he goes home. We already know the character of this woman. So she didn't give him any painkillers. We already know her character. She burned his dang feet. So we know that once he's released from the hospital, he's, that's it. This poor kid is going to wobble home and probably, stay in pain until he's completely healed. So he goes home and nobody checks on him. Nobody sees what's going on with him, how he's doing, how he's recovering. Nothing. No CPS, nothing. And obviously, his mom obviously never checked, I would assume. Or she would have seen something and she would have been more, proactive. So the coroner couldn't even decide what he died from. There's too much. There was too much damage to him. They can't make a definite determination. So his death certificate just said blunt impact injuries to the head, trunk, and extremities. They don't know what he died from. Blunt impact injuries to the head, the trunk, and the extremities, all over. Basically meaning he's beat up everywhere. He is just injured everywhere. So he's injured basically from head to toe. He's so injured, I can't even say this is finally what killed him. 5 years old. Can you imagine getting the, I'm not even going to say, getting beaten like that. I'm going to stop myself from saying a bad word. So at that time, now Mrs. Peterson is charged with capital murder. After being charged with capital murder in a police investigation, they discovered that at home, Terrell was being physically restrained all the time with a pair of pantyhose. He was tied to a banister. They also found written instructions for his care. The instructions said he gets a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, grits at lunch, and grits for dinner. His hands are always to remain tied. Obviously, she was convicted and she's now serving a life sentence. And this case brought national attention to the problem with Child Protective Services, especially, in Georgia, since this is where it happened. 2 internal investigations were conducted. They found a serious lack of judgment and numerous violations throughout the history of this case, but we already knew that because we kind of talked about just a couple of those violations and things. The Georgia legislator passed the Terell Peterson Act, which allows doctors to take temporary custody of battered children at the hospital. So remember, he's going to the hospital all the time, but the hospital staff, they have no right to take him. But now there's an act that was passed in his honor that will allow doctors, if they feel the need, to remove the child from a situation like that. I think that's really great. Again, this is an old case, so I have not done any follow-up, but I'm really wondering, even if the doctor has the capability of taking the child, if other parts are not completed properly, does that even really matter? And what I mean by that is Mrs. Peterson was given Terrell back after she had harmed him, after, they had brought a case upon her based on the first battered child syndrome. So, okay, let's say now the doctor has the capability of taking this child away, then what? You're gonna turn right back around and give that child to CPS because the doctor's not gonna take that child home. And if CPS is not adequately doing their job, or if they're overworked, underpaid, I don't know, then how does that work out? It really doesn't work out, because even in this case, as she was going to trial for capital murder, they had even said that she was still fit to take care of the other 2 kids. Like what? So I don't know if just giving the doctors the capability to remove the children would be enough, because the kids, the workers that are working the cases might still just turn around and give those kids back, because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's really difficult for them to find homes for these kids. And like I was saying in that situation where, that woman was like, made that weird comment to me where, she's like, nobody really wants the black babies. Her point was that when you come from a certain background, most of the families are struggling just as hard, and a lot of them deny wanting to keep any of those children. And she's like, so a lot of children end up in foster care in that sense. And as I'm researching this story, and as I'm actually talking about this story, and some of the few examples that I have, I'm thinking, what? Because I always hear these stories and I think, well, goodness, I've seen CPS every now and again, but then I'm thinking now as I'm talking about it, I wonder if some of the easier cases they have no problem going to. Some of the cases where they're going to the nice, child care centers, or, the foster parents have a higher, a higher means of living. Because usually, the cases that make the news a lot are the ones that are a little bit tougher to deal with. And in this case, it's possible that they just, I mean, obviously they didn't want to. So, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I don't get that. I don't even get why at some point the grandmother did not stop herself. At some point, why she didn't say, you know what, I can't do this. Because she obviously hadn't harmed her biological grandchildren. And that's the reason, again, why that is a rule and a protocol to try to find them actual family that is their blood relative, to hopefully bypass that. Not that it always bypasses it, because there's a lot of abuse cases where the abuser is the mom or the dad or the grandparent. But it's a really sad story. It's a terrible story. I didn't follow up on it, but I think his lawyer at that time was suing the state in his honor. I'm not sure if he sues the state who that money would go to, but yeah, I didn't follow up on that part because I just wanted to talk about the actual case. And he was buried, and the attorneys paid for the headstone. But it's sad. It really is. And it's really sad that he is not the only child. Sometimes it takes a horrific case like this and to change law, to change minds. And I can't even imagine what he went through. That year of his life, that last year of his life, I can't imagine, what he went through. Yeah. But anyways, so thanks for joining me for this episode, and I will talk to y'all later. Hopefully y'all join me next time I'm on. Bye y'all.